Hi everyone, I hope you are all doing well. So in this video, I'll be going over the major assignment for this course. It's due March 23rd by midnight. First, I just wanted to go over the resources on Blackboard, and then I'll bring up the assignment instructions. So if you go to the major assignment folder, which you'll find under resources here, into this folder, you'll see the assignment instructions at the top here, followed by a few other resources that will help with the assignment, and also some instructions on how to submit the assignment. At the very bottom of this folder is also an FAQ, where I've posted answers to some frequently asked questions about the assignment. And if you go back to the resources folder, you'll see another folder underneath the major assignment folder with the same color scheme. So this research design folder also contains a bunch of resources for the second part of the major assignment. So make sure to go over all of the information in both of these folders before starting, as the information in these folders will likely answer a lot of your questions and also help you with designing an experiment for the second part of the assignment. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the assignment instructions. If you were with us last semester, you'll notice that this assignment is the exact same, but with an added part. The first part of the assignment is once again about increasing your ability to summarize and synthesize information from scholarly resources. And the second part of the assignment is where you will design a study based on your research question and the information that you found. So this assignment is out of 65 total points, and it will count towards 30% of your final grade. We are accepting late submissions, but just be aware that you will lose 10% of your mark for every day that it's late. The assignment needs to be in APA format, the 7th edition. We were kind of lenient last semester with either APA 6th or 7th edition, but for this semester, you need to be using the 7th edition since it's the most current edition, and you'll also need to be familiar with this edition for your future psychology courses. You need to submit this paper onto Blackboard in either a PDF or Word document, as these are the only two formats that Blackboard can accept. If you do run into any technical difficulties with Blackboard when you go to submit, you can feel free to email myself or the course email, and we can try to figure that out. So just a quick note on plagiarism. If you plagiarize on this assignment, which plagiarism includes having no in-text citations or reference page, having in-text citations but no reference page, or vice versa, or copying sentences and paragraphs from another source and not properly citing it, all of these instances will result in a 0 on the entire paper. Even if you're paraphrasing information from another source, it needs to be properly cited. Any information that you're getting from another source needs to be cited. So when students ask about how much they should be citing, I always say it's better to oversight than to not cite enough. You won't lose marks for oversighting, but you will lose marks for not citing enough. The absolute bare minimum for citing your 5 sources for this assignment would be once at the beginning of the paragraph and again at the end of the paragraph. This is referred to as sandwich citing. If you only cite your source once in the entire paragraph, that isn't enough, and you will lose significant marks for that. So once again, the APA portion of this assignment is worth 10 points. So it is quite a big chunk of the assignment. So it's important that, 1, you don't plagiarize, and 2, that you follow APA format correctly, as it will result in lowering your marks significantly. So like I previously mentioned, part 1 of the assignment is the exact same assignment as last semester, which is essentially a literature review. So you need to pick a topic from the approved topics list and create a research question for your topic that you will explore with your 5 sources. So same as last semester, you'll need to pick 2 variables, one of which must come from at least one of these approved topics lists right here. First, you'll need an introduction paragraph. And in this paragraph, you're going to introduce your topic, define your 2 variables, and then introduce your research question that's based on these variables. Please do not choose a question that's already answered in the textbook. We want you to learn something new from this assignment and not simply just research something that's already explained in the book. The introduction paragraph must also cite the textbook, or in this case, Revel. When you're citing Revel, you can just cite it as if it were a regular textbook, using the author's last names and the year as the in-text citation. And right here is an example of an introductory paragraph for this assignment, and also some examples on how to form a research question. Next, you'll need to find 5 scholarly journal articles that all pertain to your research question and summarize them in 5 body paragraphs. So these journal articles must be peer-reviewed sources and cannot be meta-analyses or review papers. A lot of the time, meta-analyses and review articles will have those words in the title of the paper. So for example, they'll say a meta-analysis of narcissism and aggression, or something like that. Review papers do not have a methods section. So if you find a source with no methods, you know right away that you can't use that source. We also do not want you using master's theses or dissertations for this assignment, as these papers are not peer-reviewed. You can find scholarly journal articles using Google Scholar or through the University Library's online database, which is called Omni. If you find an article and you're not sure if it can be used for this assignment, feel free to email your assigned GA, or you can also email myself, and we can look that over for you. So for these 5 scholarly sources, you'll need to write a paragraph for each of them. So 5 body paragraphs total, or 1 paragraph per source. In these paragraphs, you'll need to explain the purpose of the study and the methods that they used. So for example, did they use an experimental design, an online survey, etc.? You'll also want to include some sort of information on the population that they looked at. So for example, did they look at university students? Then you'll need to explain the results of the study and what the findings mean. So we don't want you to include any statistics in these summaries, but it's more about what the findings actually mean in relation to your research question. And lastly, number 3 kind of got spliced here. So the rubric part for number 3 is down here. But lastly, you'll need to include a sentence or 2 on how your source informs the research question. So simply stating that this source is related to your research question is not enough here. We want you to discuss what it tells us about the research question. So, maybe there's a conditional finding. So for example, maybe the source that you found suggests that narcissism and aggression are related, but only in males. And in the middle here is an example of a body paragraph. So finally, you'll need a summary paragraph or conclusion paragraph. And this is where you'll summarize the findings of all 5 of your sources. You need to mention any inconsistencies or consistencies in all of the sources and identify any gaps in the research. So for example, did all 5 of your sources show similar findings, or did a few say one thing and some say another? Did all 5 of your sources focus on a particular population, or all use very similar methods? And lastly, you'll need to discuss some sort of future directions for this research. So for example, you can use one of the gaps that you previously identified and suggest that future research focus on maybe a certain population that seems to be neglected by this research topic. And at the end here, there's also an example of a conclusion paragraph and examples of consistencies and inconsistencies. So for part 1 of this assignment, it's out of 40 points total for the first part, and it has the same page requirements as last semester, which is a 6-page minimum and an 8-page maximum. So now we'll move on to part 2 of this assignment. This is the new part for this semester. When writing the assignment, you don't need to submit 2 separate documents. Part 2 can come directly after part 1 in your document. So your assignment should consist of a title page, followed by part 1, and then part 2, and lastly, the reference page at the very end. Just make sure to use appropriate subtitles according to APA format. So part 2 consists of taking the research question that you outlined in part 1 and suggesting an experiment to address this question. This experiment must follow an experimental design. It cannot be quasi-experimental or correlational. If you do not follow an experimental design, you will lose significant marks on this section, or possibly even get a 0 on this entire section. So I'm really stressing this, that you must follow an experimental design. That's where the resources from the research design folder that I showed earlier in this video will come in handy, as that folder contains a bunch of resources that discuss the different types of experiments and the components of each of these types. So for this section, you will just be describing the methods of an experiment. We are not asking you to actually go out and conduct this experiment. That would be too much work and would take probably a lot longer than this semester to complete. So we're only asking that you propose a hypothetical experiment that addresses your research question. So the marks for this section are coming from you stating your study hypotheses. You need to have at least one hypothesis, but you can have more than one if you like. I think you can, yeah, it says here you can have up to 3. I think we limit it at 3. We just don't want this section to get too complicated. So you'll also need to discuss the study components. In this section, you'll need to outline all the components of an experimental design. So you need to discuss your participants, so what population that you're looking at. You'll need to mention your experimental group and control group, and along with your independent and dependent variables. So this section here does not need to be super detailed. I'd say that you could probably explain it in a few sentences, like 1 sentence for your participants, 1 sentence for your experimental and control group, and another sentence for your variables. And lastly, you'll need to discuss the procedure for this experiment, which is how you would set up the study. And for this section, the amount of detail really depends on what you're doing, as some experiments can be quite simple. Just keep in mind that there are certain aspects of an experimental design that must be present and need to be outlined in this assignment. So for example, you'll need to discuss how you recruited your participants and how you decided who will be in what group, control versus experimental, and of course how you would go about conducting the experiment. So part 2 will be out of 15 points total, and it should be a minimum of 1 page and a maximum of 3 pages. So we're not asking for a ton of detail here, but just outlining a study with enough detail so that the GA who's marking your assignment can understand what you want to do. But like I've said, it doesn't have to be an exhaustive amount of detail. Part 2 of this assignment doesn't need to have citations. However, if you are taking information from another source, so for example, if you need to define certain terms for your experiment, or you're using the same methods as one of your sources, you still need to cite this information. You can choose to replicate methodology from another study, but of course, this information needs to be paraphrased in your own words and also properly cited. I will add, though, I'd caution against doing this, as it may seem the easiest to just simply replicate methodology from another study. However, in the past, when I've marked these assignments, I found that students who did this often did not realize the methodology that they were replicating was not a true experimental design, and thus they lost marks because of that. So if you plan to replicate methodology from another study, just make sure that the methodology you're replicating actually follows an experimental design. So as I previously mentioned, 10 points of this assignment will go towards your APA format throughout the entire paper. And you'll see the rubric right here. 1 point will be deducted for any deviations to the page requirements. So 1 point per page for being under or over the 6-page minimum, 8-page maximum for part 1, and the 1-page minimum, 3-page maximum for part 2. You'll also get 1 point deducted for missing any of the required sources. So for this assignment, there are 6 required sources. You need to cite the textbook, which you'll use in the introduction paragraph, and of course your 5 scholarly journal articles. You are welcome to use more than 6 sources as long as you are properly citing them, but you at least need these 6 required sources. So once again, this assignment is due Wednesday, March 23rd by midnight. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your assigned GA. And this is the GA who will be marking your assignment, and it's based on your last name, as you'll see depicted in this chart here. This chart is also in the syllabus, as well as on Blackboard under the syllabus tab. You can also email myself or the course email with any questions about the assignment. When marking this assignment, I always found students did better this semester than last semester. The main aspect I see students struggle with this semester is not using an experimental design for the second part. So make sure you understand the components of an experimental design and are using the resources under the research design folder. Also, take advantage of these instructions and the rubric outlined here. So this rubric that you see in the boxes throughout these instructions is the exact same rubric that the GAs use when they're marking the assignment. So keep that in mind and use that to help you know how much detail you need to include when completing the assignment. So that's all that I wanted to cover in this video, I think. So I hope you found this video helpful, and I wish you all good luck on the assignment.